Welcome to Zero Brightness, a podcast about horror video games. I'm engineer and musician Ali Jafar, stationed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm joined by my friend and fellow musician James Woodard, all the way from San Antonio, Texas.
Zero Brightness.
Well, we were talking about getting those notices from your internet provider.
Oh yeah, pirating things.
Yeah, it was so funny because the first time I got one of those, it was our roommate, but it was like really weird because like we got the letter and it said what they were pirating, and I had to go up and be like, "Hey man, like, please don't download Game of Thrones or whatever."
Yep.
But the best one was, so there's our practice space has Wi-Fi, and it's really bad Wi-Fi. Like, it's probably the worst Wi-Fi I've ever experienced in a place that I pay money to like be inside of, you know?
Uh-huh.
And like somebody apparently had just been torrenting like up and down just the like douchiest, dumbest collection of shit. Like it was like Family Guy, that show about fantasy football and like all this shit. And it was just like, they got like a takedown notice with like 8 pages of this shit. So the landlord just put them all up on the bulletin board. And it was literally just like, fuck you. If you keep doing this, we're not having internet here. And like, it was just so fucking funny because I got to just walk up and judge this guy like so hard. I was like, God, you're such a fucking douchebag, dude. You're like sitting in your practice space, smoking weed, torrenting Family Guy, probably masturbating also to Family Guy. It's like, fuck you.
I mean, Family Guy is on all the time. Why do you need to pirate that?
Yeah, I know. It's like, I remember being in high school and the challenge was to like turn off the TV because Family Guy was on all the fucking time.
Yeah. No thanks.
Oh, yeah. Nope.
This podcast actually is brought to you today by pirating the game Devotion.
Yeah. Oh my God. Look at that. We actually did like a real segue.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about the developer Red Candle Games, who have 2 games. We played both of them, and we're going to talk about them. And, you know, they're noteworthy because they made 2 really cool looking horror games, but they've been relevant recently because they came under fire from the Chinese government. It's sort of unclear. Right. And they pulled their big marquee release, which was doing super well in sales and reviews and all that, just pulled it off of Steam, and it hasn't been seen since. That was like 2 months ago. Yeah,
February. I think it was for sale for literally like 7 days before it got pulled.
So we actually used the wonders of piracy to play the game Devotion, which you can't get a copy of right now.
I plan on paying for it when I'm able to, because the game is really good.
Yeah, I mean, either from an artistic or a political perspective, it's totally the type of thing that I want to see more of. So I'm happy to pay for it.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things that's kind of alluring to me about Red Candle Games, which I didn't realize beforehand, is that they're both pretty politically subversive.
Right. Well, and this is one thing that really started to get under my skin when I started researching this topic, is that a lot of the talk around it is, well, this developer made these games, they're not political, but because of this one little thing, they've come under fire from the Chinese government. After playing these games, that's such hot garbage.
That's bullshit.
I mean, yeah, these games are so heavily political that I actually think the whole situation is a lot scarier and more fucked up, because it's like, this is directly criticizing government control. This is directly criticizing authoritarian governments. And now they've come under fire from an authoritarian government.
It's almost like the games were cautionary, and then they're reaping the consequences of that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. The other thing that's crazy is that, so the way it happened was in Devotion, there was this sort of glyph on the wall that contained some text making fun of the leader of China, who people call Pooh, and compare to Winnie the Pooh. And so this text was in the game, and people found it and freaked out, and they started getting review bombed. And I'm sure they were privately receiving all sorts of crazy fucking emails and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
The thing is that, I mean, we know that the Chinese government is super internet savvy, and that even though they restrict that internet access of the people of China, they also do a lot of weird stuff with the internet. So it's like, you really don't know if these are actual Chinese people who are pissed off about this, or if these are just puppet accounts, or if these are just government employees who are made to use their own private accounts to do this kind of stuff. Like, you really don't know. And I mean, that's my perspective on it, just as like an Arab person, where it's like, there are really horrible Arab governments that do not represent their people. There's, Israel, who's like the fucking worst, like genocidal dictatorship, and they don't represent the Israeli people because, your average person like just doesn't believe in that shit. And so it's really fucked up because it's like an exercise in social control and censorship that's also kind of painting the Chinese people as these like reactionary, hysterical, whatever. And I don't think that's real either.
Yeah, I'm a bit concerned about the safety of the developers. They might get thrown in jail and just forgotten about, Who knows? Right.
And I mean, the last update on it was literally just, it was radio silence for months. And then both Kotaku and another outlet, I think it was Polygon, like finally had been emailing them and finally got a response from their PR person. And they were basically just like, we can't do anything right now. And we're not going to do anything right now, which is very scary.
Yeah.
Like, that's not normal PR stuff.
It seems like something where you could just, change some of the assets and re-release the game quickly, but it's been a couple months, so.
Right. Well, that's what everyone said was like, well, just patch it out. And Steam even has the anti-review bomb algorithm now, and you're going to be fine. But it's clearly there's something deeper and something more at play here. I think they're just trying to see if this will blow over, or, just trying to figure out how to get out of this situation.
Well, it's really a shame because, I mean, we'll get into the game, but it's just a great game.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, really loved both of these games. I mean, at the risk of just saying what I think at the top, but
right.
I think it's okay because there's actually a lot to talk about here.
Sure, yeah.
So one thing that I think is really important to get out of the way first is the context surrounding the relationship between Taiwan and China.
Right. This is something I actually knew nothing about going into this, and just doing research on the games was really interesting and sort of enlightening.
I know a little bit more about this than the average person because when I was a kid, I got super into Chinese action movies. And there's a movie called Super Cop, which I actually think is like Police Story 2 or something. So it's a Jackie Chan movie, Chan and Michelle Yeoh. And Super Cop is a fucking baller movie. It's like easily one of the best action movies ever made. But it has this kind of weird political subplot that I didn't get. And then at the very end of the movie, like Michelle Yeoh's character is like, oh yeah, here is the political context of the whole movie. And she's talking about how Hong Kong was jointly owned, quote unquote, by China and the UK.
Interesting.
And at that time, that was in the late 90s, I think it was 98, 99, they were actually transferring control back to China completely. And so Hong Kong had its own sort of like culture and standard of living and industrial base and, information market and all this kind of stuff that had basically developed because it wasn't wholly owned by China.
Right.
The people there were ethnically, Chinese and culturally Chinese, but this place had just been operating a completely different way, And that was where a lot of the movies and culture and stuff at the time was coming from. So I like as a kid, I was like, man, that's fucking crazy. And so I went and I did some research on it, and it turns out there's, like two places like that. There's Hong Kong, which kind of developed along with China in a different path. And then there's Taiwan. A lot of people who don't know about this just think that Taiwan is part of China, like a state or something. And it's not. Taiwan is actually its own country. And it was basically established at the same time as like the modern Chinese government was established. It was called the Republic of China, different from the People's Republic of China. And it was basically an opposing government. What's really wild is that they actually had a somewhat similar sort of political development over time. You know, in the People's Republic of China, what we know as like mainland China, they had the sort of like revolution period, known as the Cultural Revolution, that was super oppressive. A lot of people were made political prisoners. A lot of people were killed. The whole country got upended. But it was sort of sold to the people as this socialist revolution. So it wasn't seen, or it wasn't marketed, I guess, as like authoritarianism. It was marketed as socialism.
Right.
Taiwan did the opposite. They had a period called the White Terror, which is when the game Detention is set. That they basically went full authoritarian, and they were actually under martial law for something like 40 years.
Right.
And so they were just like, okay, we are an authoritarian government. We are run by the military, and like we're just gonna sort of openly like keep this country on lockdown, you know? And so these two countries developed alongside each other, and there really is a very tense relationship. I mean, even up until now, you can see that whenever a politician in Taiwan asserts their independence, just vocally, just saying, hey, we're not China, the Chinese government gets fucking pissed. And like, they sort of seem to be locked in this weird kind of dance back and forth.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Taiwan is recognized as sovereign by a lot of countries.
The Chinese government doesn't really recognize them, but they also don't, you know, it's not actually a part of China. It's just this thing, and yeah, it just seems like this weird sort of dance back and forth, you know? And once again, I actually, this stuff really kind of hit home for me because like my family's from Lebanon, and Lebanon is an independent country, but its borders are really fluid because Israel has been changing them for years. And basically whenever Israel wanted to try and make a land grab, they would just say like, oh, we're annexing this, or like, oh, we're moving the border, you know? And so it's like fucked up because other countries look and say, oh, like Lebanon is its own country, Israel's its own country, but they don't functionally do anything about it. And it's just been this really fucked up back and forth forever. And so I think Taiwan is in a similar situation, and it's similar also in the sense of how scary it is, where it's like they're very small, they don't have the resources. China has like just all the resources, you know. In the same way that Israel's backed by the U.S. government, so they have the U.S.'s resources. So it's really scary and fucked up. And I think in this context, what I was thinking about is China has been really confusing to me in the last, I don't know, few years, because there's clearly a new openness that's coming whether the government wants it or not, right?
Yeah.
We're just in a different time. People have the internet. The exchange of ideas is freer. You can't just take it away. You can keep trying, but you're not going to do it.
Right. It's a losing battle.
Right.
Unless you go full authoritarian.
Yeah, exactly. Which now you have no economic incentive to do that. You know,
right.
You end up like North Korea. And China does not want to be North Korea. Like,
I don't think North Korea wants to be North Korea.
Right, exactly. They want to be the number one. They want to take over the world in the sense of like their culture and their technology and their exports and their economy and all this stuff are the best.
Right.
But so there's this newfound openness, but there's also this kind of grasping onto this authoritarianism because that's the ideological base of the government. And what's what's really crazy to me is that we've actually seen some artists who have come out and, in my opinion, been really critical of the government in a very artistic way, and they haven't really seen backlash. The first one that jumped to mind is Cixin Liu, who wrote The Three Body Problem, which is like a huge popular novel right now worldwide, but like he's super popular in China. I mean, there's like blockbuster movies made out of his books, and like, you know, his books are super popular, but The Three Body Problem is a wild ass book, dude. Like, it opens, or at least it's partially set during the Cultural Revolution, and it's like super critical of the actions of the government, and it's super anti-authoritarian. And like, it basically just continually sort of dogs on the government for thinking that the way that you create scientific progress is through authoritarianism. Like, and it just mocks that idea openly, but like,
right,
it's okay somehow.
Well, also, yeah, I mean, the visual artist Ai Weiwei has
Yeah.
been constantly criticized by the Chinese government, and I think he's been arrested as like a political dissident a couple times.
Right.
But, you know, he's got a worldwide audience, and you can't really shut that out in 2019, you know?
Right. Exactly. And I think there's a lot of artists who are just opening up that door, and the government is trying to figure out how to respond.
Right. And I guess in a lesser way, Red Candle is sort of that in video games.
Oh, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's another author too. This is what I mean. I think when you get into these sort of politics and these sort of cultural discussions, there's a lot of just nonsense. Like, there's
Sure.
stuff that people do that just makes no fucking sense. So there's an author named Wang Shuo who wrote a book called Please Don't Call Me Human that is incredible. Like, hugely recommend that to anyone who can check that out. But so that whole book is just like a satire of the Cultural Revolution. And it's basically about this guy who's just a loser who decides that because people congratulate him whenever he does something heroic for the government, that he's just gonna like destroy his mind and body and life just to like be a hero. And it's incredible. It's such a dark, like, fucked up, weird book. It's like kind of reminds you of Brazil or something, you know? Yeah, it's awesome. And what's amazing is he has a bunch of books like that that are just super political and super fucked up. And the thing that's controversial about him is that he's rude and uses a lot of profanity. It's like, okay, so how do some people who make political commentary get just totally slapped down no matter how small it is? And then some people go nuts and it's like, well, it's fine, but it'd be nice if you just use less profanity.
I wonder if the censorship in Devotion might be somehow due to the new proliferation of video games in Chinese culture. I know Steam has its own Chinese version over there, and I think a lot of like online competitive games are really popular there, like PUBG and Fortnite, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
I heard they just released their own version of PUBG or something like that, but, you know, streaming might be a new thing over there too. And I think it was a Chinese streamer that discovered the offensive image. I'm wondering if this is just the Chinese government's sort of like reactionary control grab. It has a little bit of overreach just because, you know, the whole online competitive gaming thing is pretty new over there.
Well, absolutely. I think that's the other big piece of context that's really necessary when you're talking about this developer is that the Chinese game industry is exploding right now.
Right.
I mean, in China, mobile gaming is really big, like it is in pretty much most non-Western markets. Mobile gaming is way bigger than it is like in the US. They're getting a lot of good press. There's a lot of games that have come out that are getting really good reviews. I mean, essentially in terms of full price, you know, games that aren't mobile, we're now seeing Chinese developers looked at as equals with everybody else.
Right.
And that's pretty new. I mean, there was a lot of bias against China, you know, like, oh, like Chinese stuff is just knockoffs and just like cheap garbage or whatever, right? which is its whole other conversation about why people think that. But they're finally getting the recognition, and then this Taiwanese developer steps in and makes a game that is even more acclaimed and is on track to be more popular than all of this stuff, and it's critical of the Chinese government. I can totally see that just being a huge problem for, the powers that be.
Right. And before the game got pulled, I was doing research on the game, and I saw a lot of local Taiwanese and Chinese press covering this game. And it was sort of a big deal. I believe like the voice actors and the little girl voice actress is pretty well known in Taiwan. She's like kind of a pseudo celebrity. And they were like interviewing her for local news. There was a lot of buzz around this game as like a Taiwanese like cultural export. It's so interesting how it released, and it was just like it was sort of like a little Taiwanese cultural phenomenon, and then it went down in flames like less than a week later, and it's just stuck in this strange purgatory. Right.
And the other thing is that Detention was really popular in China.
Was it?
Mm-hmm. So I think that is another piece of this puzzle. It really feels like I'm sure you felt the same way when you're trying to research this stuff. It's like you're putting together a puzzle. You're like, what happened? Why did this happen? Because I think the press coverage of it has been really bad and really short-sighted.
Right. Yeah. I think the most interesting stuff that I found is actually a Reddit post that you shared with me. Yeah. I believe it's from a Taiwanese or Chinese Reddit user. And they explain all the cultural significance of devotion that a Westerner would just not pick up. And I think, to tell this story, you need a Chinese or Taiwanese voice to like fully grasp the situation.
Absolutely. And that was why I kind of did this research and was thinking about all this stuff, because even while I was playing, I played Devotion first. And while I was playing it, I felt like there were just so many things that I didn't understand. Because, and it's the same with Detention too. With Detention, I actually did my research before I played the game, because I just felt like these games are so deeply rooted in all the stuff we're talking about. The games are set in Taiwan. They're set in a specific time and place. They're representative of cultural shifts and phenomena that were happening at the time. Yeah. And they're coming out now as a reflection of the political situation now.
I took the opposite approach. I went into both of them blind. And so I think I got like 2 layers of appreciation for them, because at face value, they are like, good horror games. Right. Detention's a point and click horror. Devotion is a first person Layers of Fear style horror. And they work really well as that, just formally as functional game products.
Right.
But I think stepping back from that, you're left with a lot of questions culturally. Well, at least me as a Westerner, there were a lot of things that didn't make sense or that I didn't understand. And then I started doing research, and it kind of like it opened a bit of a doorway of like understanding. It gives you context of, the political climate, because these games are like cautionary tales. It's like reading 1984 or something, but they're given to you under this guise as horror games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is what really made them hit home for me, was that truth contrasted with, like I said, how the press is handling this whole situation. Yeah. Which I think is just so poor. And I mean, I have a bit of background in journalism. I'm definitely not a journalist, but it was just interesting to watch it happen and be like, man, you guys are always sort of reaching for like this big thing to talk about, or this big thing to break. And here it is. And y'all are just acting like a bunch of morons,
Yeah. Instead of writing, the little blurb about, hey, we still haven't got news about this. Like, this could be a feature about, how this new media is impacting Taiwanese culture in a big way.
Absolutely. And instead it's like, yeah, we're just getting blurbs, and all the other big issues that a lot of outlets are trying to sort of pick up on or talk about are just, I don't know, they just seem like really small potatoes in comparison to this. But that's my frame of reference, just coming from the background I come from, and just knowing that it's like, yeah, you can get pulled out of your house and killed over shit like this.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, if someone's talking about loot boxes being unfair to gamers, or like, why aren't, it's like, I totally don't give a shit about that. But even some of the coverage of like union stuff is starting to really kind of rub me the wrong way, because there's a lot of fucking myopic chatter about like, well, why isn't every developer unionizing? It's like, well, have you ever tried to unionize something? Like,
yeah. People fucking died over that shit.
Yeah. People also get dragged out of their homes and shot over that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
it's
think
also
in Ohio, people were mowed down with machine guns at coal plants. People forget about that so quickly.
Yeah, that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
It's also like, I just get so fed up with just internet commenters acting like people don't have to pay their fucking bills.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, go ahead.
I mean, that was literally it. It's just like, I work in the worst industry. Like, there's just no money making there. You just have to hustle all the time. Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, man, I've worked some pretty shitty places for pretty shitty people. I still fucking do. And it's like, it's because I got my fucking bills to pay. And the more money you make and the more comfortable you get, the more important it is to keep paying those fucking bills. And so it's like, I'm totally pro union, and I'm fucking like, hang all the bosses, dude. Like, fuck them. But at the same time, it's like, you have to give people a little bit of leeway. You have to try and understand the person who says, well, I have to pay my bills.
Yeah, for sure. There's a weird stigma about creative people being lazy. If you want to see somebody hustle, like, go to your most creative friend. You know what I mean?
No, I know. And I was actually thinking about that the other day, that it's like, as a musician and an engineer, I fucking tortured myself for years and years and years. And I partially did it because I like making those sorts of projects and I have a lot of creative energy, but I would be hugely lying if I said that it wasn't partially just stigma and just wanting to prove everyone wrong. So when people say, you can't make a living doing music, or like, musicians are lazy, I'm like, fuck you, dude. I work all day, every day, and I make a living doing this. Like, fuck you.
Yeah. I would definitely say like my half fucking the ambition. Yeah, definitely. Like, half my ambition in like my musical career has been like fuck yous to people that said I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
and it's been at a great detriment to my personal life. I mean,
right?
Like, being a touring musician like ruined my 20s.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, but I get that. I've been thinking about that a lot, because I get that same feeling reading people talk about game developers now, whether it's positive or negative comments. Like I said, there's just so much myopic bullshit. There's so much like people just not trying to put themselves in that scenario.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to say about that is that, I mean, these people commenting on, video game articles, they're a bunch of shitty like gamer types that like have no like real grasp on what it is to like work that sort of job or anything.
And I've been thinking about this a lot lately too, because we like to stereotype gamers a lot.
It's fun.
It is. It's just good fun. And we are technically gamers as well.
For sure. Yeah. It's,
but it's, I've really started to think about this, where it's like, is this hobby just super sheltered?
Yeah. And it's also, I think, there's like a poisonous subculture. And I think it has to do with like how horrible like adolescent boys are. Like, one adolescent boy is okay, but then you put like 5 of them unattended together. That's when like atrocities happen.
Oh, yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of gamer culture is like the perpetuation of that, like the misogyny and like just like fun, casual racism and all that.
Well, I was just thinking about it because lately, comments are getting, I guess, a little more like, mindful of these sort of issues. And so you'll see someone post something really terrible, but sort of in an unintentional way, you know?
Yeah.
And then someone else will jump in and just be like, hey man, that's really fucked up. And then the person, you know, if they're a reasonable person, will be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. But it'll be something so basic, like, oh, like women are people. And it's like, you never thought of that? And it's like, man, I think this whole, I don't know, the whole like fandom is just super sheltered.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on what we're looking at. You look at the arguments about like that Battlefield game where they actually like put women in the game and everybody was pissed off. Dudes like me and you aren't going to play that game,
right?
That's a different set of gamers. We
Right.
want to play the games that are cautionary tales about the Chinese government being totalitarian.
Yeah, exactly. So the first game by Red Candle was Detention.
Yeah. January 2017, Steam release. In Chinese, it means returning to school, which I guess is a little more foreshadowing than Detention was. So as Ollie was saying earlier, it's set in the 1960s in Taiwan. Taiwan was under martial law. There was a period called the White Terror period, which was almost 40 years long, where thousands were executed, hundreds of thousands of political dissidents were imprisoned. Pretty insane. Like they imprisoned most of like the intelligentsia, social elite, for being like communist sympathizers and stuff. So
Right. And that's what I thought was interesting earlier, and that's why this game made me think of those Chinese works about the Cultural Revolution, was that China did the same thing, but they just had a different marketing on it.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, like the Three Body Problem, everyone should go fucking read that book. It's so good. It's just a really good sci-fi novel, but it has all this political undertones and subplots, and that's kind of what's so interesting about approaching this game politically, because it's like, oh yeah, that's the same thing that happened, except in China it was you guys are reactionaries, and in Taiwan it was you guys are communists.
And interestingly enough, there is a known incident that happened at a middle school during the White Terror period. But I found it really hard to find details on that online. Huh. So this may be like loosely tied to a real event at a school. So, yeah.
Well, and I think the setting of the school is cool because they use it as sort of a microcosm of the country.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Like it's just this place that people have to go to. It's run by this authoritarian, ex-military general, but everyone there is really just trying to survive and live. And
like you said, the microcosm aspect is really interesting.
I mean, that was the thing for me. Well, like when I was growing up, like the political situation in Lebanon is like insane. It always has been. And I remember, thinking that people must have these strong opinions on everything if you live there, right?
Right.
And we actually go over there and you talk to people and it's like, hey man, like what do you think about all these Syrian soldiers all over the place? And people are like, we don't fucking care, dude. Like
I gotta get to work in 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And some people were even like, I'm glad that Syria is here because it means that like, someone else isn't here. And so it's like, really, that's the truth of it. With all this political shit, yes, there are people who have strong opinions and there's people who are, very, very ideological, but the average person doesn't fucking care. They just want to live their life.
Right. My homework is due tomorrow.
Right. And I think that's the crux of what a lot of the current American political situation is like these people are trying to make it so we can't live our lives. That's just how fucking dire it's gotten,
Yeah. Thanks, Facebook.
Yeah. Thank you, Facebook Nazis and Facebook Nazis and the Republican senators who love them. It's the title of my romance novel I'm writing.
Oh, I can see the cover now. Fabio on the cover.
No, it's Mitch McConnell like caressing like one of those tiki torch guys.
Yes, but the tiki torch guy is Fabio.
Yeah, and the dicks are out.
I'm gonna Photoshop this.
That's our new profile picture on Facebook. Let's get banned, bro.
Yeah. We'll call it Devotion 2.
Devotion 2, devoted to you.
Perfect.
So anyway, the game itself is a third-person point-and-click adventure game, is how you described it, which I like. I really like this style of game. I've noticed that it's kind of taken off in the last few years. We've gotten games like Night in the Woods.
Oh yeah, Night in the Woods. Well, Night in the Woods wasn't point-and-click though, which is something I wanted to bring up. Is that this game doesn't have controller support, and that's total bullshit because it could totally support a controller.
Dude, this is actually really funny. I played it on Switch, so yeah.
Oh my god.
I played it with a controller.
Wow.
Oh, dude, this would suck as a point-and-click game.
Well, it doesn't suck because it's like, this is the thing I was going to bring up. You know, since it was point-and-click on PC, I played it sort of like, you know, like a simplified, like LucasArts adventure game.
Sure.
Where you just click at things. But I don't think that was to its detriment because it's pretty simple and there's no dead ends or like backtracking or looping. It's more linear of an experience. Yeah,
what I was going to say about this style of game, and specifically thinking of Night in the Woods, I really enjoy it because it plays just like an adventure. You know, there's side-scrolling 2D games that more or less are point-and-click adventure games, but you get to actually directly control the character and interact with things, and it just gives you that extra level of like gaminess and immersion that I really, really enjoy.
Right.
So the two games that it made me think of the most were, I've already said Night in the Woods, but the other one was a game called The Cat Lady, which is a 2014 PC game. I believe it's from 2014. And that game is really cool. It kind of has that similar janky Newgrounds style.
Like Flash style animation.
Yeah, but it's like it's a lot uglier, but it's kind of on purpose. I really, really like that game, and it's very, very bizarre. But that game was point and click, and I kind of felt like there were a lot of moments where I was like, I wish I could just control this character because it just gives it that extra level of just immersion and just that kind of tactile feel. So I actually really recommend playing this on a console.
The spiritual sequel for Cat Lady just came out. I don't know if you were aware.
Anyway, I like this style of game. I think of all the sort of updates to the adventure game formula, this is probably my favorite one.
Yeah. Well, I think you're missing one huge sort of reference or one huge influence, which is Silent Hill 1.
Oh, yeah.
This game is deeply Silent Hill 1. I don't know if you picked up these cues or not, but early on in the game when you're exploring the school, I feel like there's a huge nod to Silent Hill 1 because there's a part where you can't progress because there's like a big metal gate wall. And the solution to getting around the school is like lifted straight from Silent Hill 1. You have to take the long way around and like take that staircase and I feel like the architecture and staircase was like taken straight from Silent Hill 1.
I don't know if there are any direct references, direct references to Silent Hill in this game, but there is in Devotion. I don't know if you caught this, but there's a piano in the apartment, and
yes,
the metronome is a Yamaoka brand metronome. And I was like, oh, you fuckers.
That's great. Well, and that puzzle was in Silent Hill 1 in the school, the piano puzzle.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing too is that this game has basically kind of a layered other world, just like Silent Hill does. It's not a mechanic or a core part of the game, but the school is shown in various states of decay. You know, there's like the real world, then there's like the kind of dark, rusty other world, and there's the totally black, falling apart other world, and it kind of just keeps stepping down.
Sure.
It's super cool. I think they did that style really well. I mean, it's a trope now because of Silent Hill, but I thought they did it well.
Yeah, I think the backgrounds, they have like a painterly style.
Yes.
Even though the perspective is very flat, you know, you get the straight like 90-degree angle walls and everything. The use of color and painterly, I think, application makes it look really nice. For
sure. So this game has a really crazy, distinct art style. I don't know. You said initially you didn't really like it.
Yeah, so I don't like the way the characters look. I do like the backgrounds. I hate the animation. It's very like you said, like Newgrounds, like flash animation, like almost like paper dolls.
And I loved it because the backgrounds are gorgeous, like you said, but the characters are supposed to look like paper dolls. They reference paper and paper airplanes and all this stuff multiple times in the dialogue and throughout the game. And also like it's very stark because like the characters are white and flat and they look and they move stiffly, but nothing else in the game does. The backgrounds are all really fluid and gorgeous and all this kind of stuff. So I liked it as a choice. I understand kind of why you didn't.
Maybe the art direction would make more sense if it was like animated, like, you know, like frames of animation instead of like, you know, like the flash animation. Maybe that would have made it didn't read as papery to me, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that, but I loved it. It's a really, either way, it's a really striking looking game, which I thought was totally to its benefit.
Yeah.
The lighting is cool. The use of color is cool because there isn't a lot of it.
I don't know. I might feel differently if I played it with a controller.
I think you would. Now that I know that, I feel like you may have had a slightly different experience playing with a controller. Well, and so I've said this, dude. I fucking love the Switch, and I love playing stuff in handheld because that's like mostly how I did it when I was a kid. So it's just so comfortable and like normal to me to just play stuff on like a handheld device.
Right.
And this game was really good. Playing it handheld, it was really good with like the Pro controller.
Yeah, I have a different experience with the Switch. It does two things for me. It's an exclusives machine, so I can play Mario, and then I have one of those flip grips, so I can play vertical screen games. So I have like vertical screen arcade shooters that I play with the flip grip. But other than that, it doesn't get a lot of play. If there's a port, I'm gonna get it on Steam because, you know, I paid for a 1080 Ti. I'm going to use it.
Yeah, I totally get that. I kind of try and be, besides exclusives, I just sort of try and think like, oh, what would I really like to play in that format, you know? Yeah. So
also there's a Nintendo tax on all the software. I feel like all the games are like $10-15 more expensive on Switch.
Not always, but for a lot of stuff, yeah. And there's never sales. So, but like I'm really deep into Friends of Ringo Ishikawa right now. And that game literally feels like a supersized, beefed up Game Boy Advance game. And so I'm just loving literally playing it the exact way I would have in, 2001, but with a bigger screen. Like, I'm just loving it. Just late at night, just fucking rocking it on the Switch. And in episode 5, I was trying to remember the name of this very like Treasure Games inspired game, and I did. It's called Iconoclasts.
Oh yeah, I have that on Switch actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I got the cart from Limited Run. That's what'll get me to buy Switch games.
Oh, me too. Yeah, like I've been following a few indie games that it's been like they've been promising a cart release on the Switch. I'm like, do it.
Give me dim carts. Give me dim full color manuals.
There's supposedly been in the works for a long time a Hyper Light Drifter Switch cart.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I've got the 4 LP box set of the Hyper Light Drifter soundtrack. Oh. It's literally one of the like top 5 best video game soundtracks of all time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really need to get that vinyl because I listen to it all the fucking time.
It's fantastic. The synth sounds are so like haunting, you know?
Yeah, no, I love it. So I like the Switch just for being able to choose like what kind of experience I'm going to have with a game. You know, if it's like, I just want to play it, I'll get it on PC. But if I want to have that experience, I'll get it on Switch. With Detention, it was 100% like, okay, I want to have this experience. Because it also kind of has that feeling for me of like a beefed up Game Boy Advance game kind of. Because like I used to really like playing the few adventure games that were on the Game Boy Advance. Like Gabriel Knight was on the Game Boy Advance.
Really?
Yeah, dude, it's a good port. So I would recommend to anyone who wants to check out this game. Definitely get a console. I think it's on like every console, or at least it's on the Switch.
I think it's pretty inexpensive too.
Yeah, I mean, it was like $12.
Yeah, totally worth $12. Oh, so do we want to talk about the game mechanics a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
So in terms of puzzles, it's mostly item based. Like solve a simple puzzle. Find a key, progress to the next stage. It's pretty linear. I would say the game starts more open-ended and becomes more linear as the story progresses, which sort of gives you the illusion of it being a bigger game than it really is. Besides that, there's really no dead ends. It's forgivable. It's not like a old Sierra game or anything. But then I guess the other big game mechanic is the enemies, which sort of disappear towards the end of the game.
Yeah, so this is kind of a weird one because, the game doesn't have combat, but it has these enemies that you need to avoid, usually by holding your breath.
Right.
And they're not really a big part of the game. Early on, you get a little pamphlet that's a tutorial.
Right.
And you get a new sort of hint about how to get away from them every time there's a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Although there's only two, and they're not really a big part of the late game. And so I guess you could look at it as a sort of a weird non-entity, but I actually love the design of these things. I thought was so cool.
But in terms of total just gameplay design, it's you get the pamphlet teaching you how to deal with them. You deal with them 3 times and then you never see them again. And then you meet the next one and you get the pamphlet and you deal with them a couple times and then it's over. So I think as a mechanic, it's sort of stilted. But yeah, the designs are cool and they look really cool. And I think, if you're watching the game, I mean, it's cool looking, but I don't know if it really does anything for the game.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked, the normal ones who you have in the notes as scary ladies. Mm-hmm. I really liked what they did for the atmosphere of wherever they were. 'Cause they make this sort of really creepy crying noise.
Yeah.
This sort of crying, laughing, cut up, weird, fucked up noise.
It's like horror ASMR.
I love what they added to the atmosphere of any room they were in. And when you entered a room and heard that, it wasn't in an action game where you're oh, I gotta get ready to fight. But it was just ooh, they're here,
Yeah. It's more of a Fatal Frame feeling, I think.
Yeah, totally. I thought it was really effective in that way.
Yeah.
And, the game has really good atmosphere. The art and the music and everything comes together really well. And so I appreciated that the enemies were also just sort of a piece of the atmosphere. Towards the end, it goes away because they also don't really have anything to do with the story.
And yeah, that brings up a good point. They don't really do anything for the story, do they?
No.
They're more, they seem to me be more folklore-ish. Yeah. Which sort of throws you off the scent in terms of this game's theme. What are they doing in terms of folklore? I mean, one thing we didn't talk about Taiwanese culture is that they're very superstitious.
Right.
So maybe this is just, the nod to the heavy superstition in Taiwanese culture.
Right, which becomes the theme in Devotion.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think in this game, it's maybe just another element, but it's cool. It's well done. I really like the second one, the tall boys.
Oh yeah, the lantern guys.
Yeah.
Super creepy. Yeah.
And just super cool. And
they lean over and smell you.
Yeah.
While you're holding your breath.
It's so creepy. And I don't know. I was definitely playing it. Monica walked past and was like, what the fuck is that? I think it's cool that it has that element in it because I think the game would be a little dry without them.
Yeah, they do raise the tension in the first half. I guess I feel like the game takes a bigger switch to more puzzle-based solutions for the third or second half. You get to a part of the game where you're jumping between time periods.
Right.
Which is something they use again in the next game, Devotion. I feel like the game in one way got more interesting because the puzzles became a little more complicated, but I feel like the tension was lowered also because the sense of danger wasn't there. One
thing this game does is something that a lot of horror games do, which is that they realize about halfway through the game that they want to pivot. Because if your game isn't action-based, you can't just do what action games do and just make everything harder and more stressful.
Right.
So instead, you have to pivot. I mean, this is exactly the reason why Resident Evil established the secret lab in the basement trope, because they were like, well, we want to show players something different in the second half, so we have to pivot.
They got all the guns now. What do we do?
Right. In the modern era, I think the secret lab in the basement is sort of the emotional plot line. And this game definitely 100% pivots into the emotional plot line.
Sure. It starts showing its cards.
Yeah. I think what this game does is that in the last third or last half, it stops being about what happened to the school, what's going on in the school, what are these ghosts, and literally just becomes what's going on with Ray, who's the main character.
Right.
And it literally takes you into her house in different time periods and shows you the sort of formative experiences that made this character you've been playing.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing the game does really well is suggest things about characters. Because like you don't get a ton of dialogue, you don't get a ton of information, but you get all these little hints and clues about the kind of person she is and the way she acts and et cetera, et cetera. So when you finally get to see her internal life, it's really, really fascinating.
Right. And so the character's personal story, that's what the Silent Hill style, game is wrapped around. But then there's another bigger like societal wrapping of totalitarianism in the country and how that ties into her personal story.
Right. So I think that this is kind of the place where we have to talk about spoilery shit. Hey guys, Ali here. Just letting you know that we do get super spoilery with Detention. If you want to skip that, you can jump ahead to the 1 hour mark. However, we decided not to spoil Devotion. So after that, the podcast is spoiler free. Have fun. So I'm going to say that if you're listening and you haven't checked out these games, you have to pirate Devotion, but you can go check out Detention, and I would highly encourage you to because it's an awesome game.
And they probably need to make their bail, so
yeah,
go
exactly.
Donate.
Please help. Essentially, the other big split that happens in the story when we start to find out more about Ray's personal life is that we find out more about what was actually going on in the school. Right. We've gotten little hints and clues. We know that it's run by this totalitarian ex-military general guy. People are scared of him, but we find out a few things. First is that there's basically like a banned book club where they import and read banned books that are against government regulations.
Right. And one of the teachers is the head of it.
Right. And the other thing we find out is that Ray has a really shitty home life, and this drives her to start an inappropriate relationship with this school counselor. Right.
A male school counselor.
Right. And so things start moving together in this way. You find out about these two plot lines. And I really love how the game tells the story because it's intentionally obtuse.
Yeah, and it's sometimes pretty abstract.
Yeah. So, and it shows you things that are incorrect.
Right.
And then we'll later show you the actual scene. So you'll see a scene with one character, and then later a different character has jumped in and replaced them. And throughout the course of this, the game also starts to really like reveal its themes. There's a lot of great lines and great quotes. There's one, for example, that really made me start thinking about how this game, even before it was over, about how it's a message about censorship and anti-authoritarianism, which is when the counselor says there are things our censored textbooks don't tell us.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of just lays it out there that it's like, oh yeah, like this is sort of what the theme is. But there's also a lot of talk about like self-determination as well. So Ray's kind of struggling both against this oppressive ideological thing, but she's also trying to figure out what she's going to do with her life and if she's going to do what her parents want. And that's where the paper theme kind of comes in. Like you're playing as this character who just feels like she is like weightless and paper thin because everybody is telling her what to do and everybody's telling her something different. One
of the most striking visual examples that kind of lingered with me was that, she's like super vulnerable. She starts like confiding in the inappropriate relationship with the counselor, and they go meet at a movie theater, and there's, the character is like clearly like super in love, and in an abstract way, you open a door and walk through it, and it's like it looks like this like cutesy anime, like,
oh yeah,
fantasy world, and everything's like super happy and like happy animals and stuff. And it's like the entrance to the movie theater. But as you're walking out, you see it as it really is. And it's just like a rotting Silent Hill theater.
Right. Well, and even after that specific point in the game, the school gets really, really messed up looking when you go back in. It's like literally disintegrating and falling apart. Everything is really abstract. There's multiple versions of your character that you have to jump between. There's like you and shadow yous. And yeah, it's really, really cool illustration of that whole concept. Basically, after that event, Ray is now alone because the relationship she was having with the counselor is ended by that counselor. And so she basically decides to get back on him, or back at him, by narking on the banned book club.
Right. Because she misreads a note as thinking that the counselor is now in a relationship with the teacher that runs the band book club. So she's going to narc on them and ruin that relationship for sour grapes, I guess.
Right. But what actually ends up happening is the students go to jail for 15 years and they kill the counselor. Basically, she ends up ruining a whole bunch of people's lives just over her own petty jealousy. And you realize that the frame story of the whole game is that she's a ghost. Right. Who has all this unfulfilled business, and it's all being dredged up because one of the characters from very early in the game that we didn't talk about at all, which I think is fine. You see him die in the game, but it's not real, and he actually was just like in prison, and he comes back to the school as like a middle-aged man, and he's just like looking around and smoking a cig.
Yeah, and we didn't give everything away, so even if you listen to the spoilers, there's still something. There's still a lot of meat on them bones. There's
a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of detail that we didn't give away. The one thing about this game that I kind of maybe didn't love, but also do kind of love, is that there's a good ending and a bad ending. We both got the bad ending.
Right. I haven't looked up the good one yet. But I assume it's still like kind of bad.
So here's what's kind of okay. So yeah, that's exactly my point is, well, I hate it because the way that you get the good ending is kind of obtuse. Like I got what the game was trying to get me to do, but I did it wrong, I guess. And it's like super easy to do it wrong. When you actually see the good ending, all the exact same shit happens, but it's just framed as like, well, now she's worked through her stuff and her ghost is released from the endless karmic cycle of like feeling bad. And that's the only difference. But all the same shit happens. So it's kind of misleading to say it's a good ending and a bad ending. But the bad ending does end on a real bummery note.
So really the cherry on top is that she gets like she gets a big award for narking on everybody and getting people executed. Right. I really feel like that's like the real cherry on top of narking on everybody you know.
Is getting the Narc of the Year award.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really cool story. I loved how it jumped into all these tropes like we were talking about. You know, there's the Silent Hill stuff. There's these kind of almost zombie-ish enemies. There's the haunted school, blah, blah, blah. And then just
teen suicide stuff.
Yeah.
Little Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right. It slowly unraveled all of it, you know? And by the end of the game, it's just a story about like someone just getting mixed up in their own feelings and accidentally sending a bunch of people to their death in a totalitarian regime.
We were talking in one of the previous episodes about society circling the drain, you know? I think we need more of this.
Well, it's absolutely a cautionary tale, and they make reference to, you know, how terrible everything has been in the last 10 years or so, you know? And this game's set in the 60s, 70s, like late 60s, early 70s, I think. And they keep making reference to like, yeah, it's been really rough, man. And yeah, it's absolutely a cautionary tale.
Great stuff. Video games, man.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for listening to the Zero Brightness podcast. If you want to support us, the most direct ways are at our Patreon, which is at patreon.com/zerobrightness. You can also give us a rating on the service of your choice. I know Apple's super into that. And when you leave a rating, you can also leave us a suggestion for a future episode topic. You can also follow us on Facebook as well as Instagram. We're at Zero Brightness Pod. You can also shoot us an email with thoughts, comments, whatever at zerobrightnesspodcast@gmail.com. It's been really cool interacting with people and sharing thoughts on Facebook and Reddit. So hoping to hear from you guys more directly in the future. Okay, enjoy the rest of the episode. What's cool about playing this game and Devotion at the same time is you can see how many of these ideas they developed into Devotion.
Yes, absolutely.
I think Devotion is such a cool second game from a company, or just such a cool step up from their first game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it has so many of the same ideas and philosophical ideas and game design ideas, but it's just done in a much bigger and better way.
Yeah, so it I would say it's like 80% the same themes, but the game is so ridiculously different that it really feels like a complete, like evolution of the theme.
It's wild. Just from a perceptual sense, you wouldn't think it was made by the same company, but yeah, once you pick it apart, you're like, oh yeah, this is the same guys. So Devotion, as we kind of talked about in the intro, was released in February of this year. It's a first-person exploration-based adventure game. It's very, very PT inspired. Won't belabor that. We've talked about that enough on this show.
Yeah.
But I guess I
probably will reference Layers of Fear a lot in this review, because I feel like the entire time I was playing this game, I was thinking about Layers of Fear, because it really succeeds in doing everything that Layers of Fear failed at.
I think this game has a lot of ideas that you may have seen in other first-person horror games, and a lot of concepts that the player probably is familiar with if they're familiar with this genre, but the way it's executed and the high level at which it's operating is really, really stunning.
Right. It also has a sort of minimalist approach in terms of atmosphere, and as a gameplay design choice or a scenario design idea, them limiting themselves to such a small scope probably helped with the narrative.
I totally agree, and I think the thing that this game excels at is giving you context. So even though, like we said earlier, as a American playing this game, there was a lot of stuff that I felt like I don't have the context, or I don't totally get this, but within the story and the game itself, you get all the context that you need on a basic level, even if you're not familiar with it. And I mean, it's apparent from the opening moments of the game. I love how this game opens. Basically, the beginning of this game is your character opens their eyes. You're in a first-person perspective. They're sitting at a table in front of a TV, and you hear a woman talking to you from the kitchen while she's cooking, and she's talking to you about your daughter. So right away you get, okay, this is a family. I'm the dad. My wife and the mother of this kid is in the kitchen right now. The kid is not in this scene, and she's just basically chatting with you, making small talk, and the graphics are gorgeous, and you're really in this little apartment living this scene, and you don't know where it's going to go next. And there's a knock at the door, and she says, oh, can you check that out? You go to the door, open the door, you're outside your apartment in a hallway, you keep walking, and then you're at another door, open it up, and you're back in your apartment, but it's totally different.
Yes.
And right there in 2 minutes, the game has given you all the context you need for the story. It's shown you what the gameplay loop is going to be like. and it's like explicitly told you that you're going through different time periods and stuff through signs on the wall and stuff.
It wears its heart on its sleeve.
That just like really blew me away. Like I haven't seen something like that in a long time. Just how well done and simple that was.
Yeah, and it throws you right into it. Like there's no bullshit, no 20-minute cutscene at the beginning. You know,
right.
Time to go.
Well, and I was thinking about it because there's been a lot of talk lately about how a lot of new games don't know how to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like every big release this year, the reviews are all like, man, the first 2 hours of this are miserable. You know, some of them it's like the first 20 hours are not good. And it's like 20 hours, 20 fucking hours. Are you kidding me?
I sympathize because I just finished Yakuza Kiwami 2. And for every story checkbox in that game, there's like a 15-minute cutscene. So at least it feels like it.
Right. But like, you know, the thing about Yakuza, I love those games, but I've really been meaning to catch up on them. I've only played the first two on the PS2. And they have great intros, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
The intro of the first Yakuza is like fucking legendary. Like you start up and it's like a stormy night and you have to go beat up a bunch of dudes. The game is literally like, here's the button you press to slam a guy's head into the wall. You're like, this fucking rips. And then the game is like, okay, actually you go to jail. It's a year later. Now do all that shit again.
Yep.
And you're like, yes. Like you're just so fucking, you're just fucking down, you know? And it's like, those are long games. Those are involved games, but it's important to establish what you're going to do and what the world is right away, you know? Like, I don't know. It's a bummer to hear that games are kind of losing. A lot of games are losing the art of like a really good punchy intro, but Devotion definitely has probably the best intro I've seen in a long time. When you start playing the game, you may feel like, oh, like if this is all there is, you know, what then is going to keep me hooked, or what are going to be the depths? And I think the game is really good about doling out information to keep you hooked.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, like essentially the gameplay loop is you go into a new version of your apartment. You are looking around for clues and solving, you know, pretty simple item-based puzzles. And every time you find a new item, not even necessarily solve a puzzle, but every time you find a new item, you get another clue, another piece of the puzzle, you know, just something to let you try or to help you figure out what's going on with this family.
Right. And most of the items are symbolic items that reveal memories. So they might not even be, you know, some stuff that wouldn't make sense are like symbolic, and you would set up symbolic things.
Right, exactly. And it's paced so well, and it has a really good progression feel as well. Because like I remember early on, some of this, you know, sometimes you find something and you get a little clue, and then it pays off later in a moment, and you're like, oh, that's all pretty cool. But then later on, like you'll find a clue and you'll see something, and then you'll come back and the landscape will be totally different, or you will have like completely altered the apartment itself.
Right.
Know?
At first, it doesn't make sense how the apartment keeps changing, but then you realize that you're sort of living in a broken narrative, and it's not really the apartment that's changing; it's the time period is changing. So you'll jump back and forth between years of this family's life, and you unravel the story in a broken narrative, back and forth sort of way.
Right. And as you go on, you start to, like I said, you piece together what happened to this family and how things fell apart for them.
Right.
And it's really, really cool. It's obviously super dark and super depressing.
I feel like the big difference in terms of theme between the two games, you know, the government, state, totalitarianism is really the main point. I feel like for Devotion, it becomes a lot more personal and what society expects of a family and a mother and a man.
Right. And I think that's another really cool thing they do with the progression from Detention to Devotion is to try and address not only more modern issues, but also like literally what happened after. So,
Right.
yeah, we found this really, really good Reddit post where a user named OctaveBits, which is a really good username, basically gave a bunch of cultural background on Taiwan and talked about some of the themes in the game in relation to Taiwanese culture. To basically sum it up, they were saying that around the time the game is set, the martial law was ending. The country was experiencing this sort of economic boom. People were starting to kind of live a more modern lifestyle and have more creature comfort, stuff like that.
Yeah, they said something that was interesting. They said there was almost like an American dream feel. Like if you moved to Taiwan, you could, have the American dream, essentially.
So at the same time, though, they were still grappling with all of these long-held traditional cultural beliefs, which are...
Right.
I mean, surprisingly, they're not really unique to Taiwan. I mean, this game could really hit home for anybody who's from any kind of traditional culture.
Absolutely.
And it did for me, totally.
There's a lot of superstition built into the game. And, a little personal story. About a decade ago, I was engaged to a girl whose dad was a curandero, which is a Mexican spiritual healer. And so, I've been to his store, his botanica, and we had like an altar set up in the back. And so a lot of the really superstitious stuff that happens in this game was really reminiscent of like my experience with like a spiritual healer from Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
And that he was like a total fucking charlatan too. He made a lot of money on like unsuspecting old ladies, etc. So there are a lot of parallels here to the game.
Absolutely. And I think for me the big thing that hit home was the fact that in this culture, like a lot of traditional cultures, like mental health was not spoken about.
Right.
And mental
blame
health
it on a ghost or something. Yeah.
Right. Mental illness was not seen as real. These issues just were not discussed. Like it wasn't just that there wasn't awareness. It did not exist because people refused to acknowledge its existence. And that's how we got crazy superstitions, faith healers, a lot of religious extremists. I mean,
burn the witch.
Yeah. It's literally all just coming from people not wanting to deal with mental illness, with societal stigma and all this kind of stuff. And
right.
I mean, my family, dude, everyone just had clearly had so much just like undiagnosed mental illness that it really my family just like totally fell apart like when I was a kid, and then just kept falling apart further and further because like nobody over the age of like 30 in my family would seek any sort of help or treatment for anything. Yeah,
I mean, that's not just like cultural, but also generational. I mean,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can edit this out, but like my family's all fucked up. Like everybody's family has these stories. Everybody's fucked up. Child molesters in families, and fucking people in jail for murder are in families. Everybody's got like dark family stories.
Right.
And so, that's probably, one of the reasons why this game resonated with us,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I was saying about Detention. I feel the same way about Devotion, where it's like these are very, very universal themes. Everyone has their own way that they're going to connect to it, and based on culture and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately the themes are very, very universal. And yeah, I thought it was brilliant. Like this game just hit all those notes so well. It's so well written.
Yeah, totally.
It feels like such an evolution of Detention, where they were experimenting with telling a story with an unreliable narrator and giving you the clues in a non-chronological order and all those sorts of things. And this game, they just kicked it into overdrive.
It also like respects the player in terms of, like intelligence. Like you said, it doesn't give all the answers to you. And it sort of it expects you to keep up with it, and it doesn't dish it out like you're like like a 14-year-old. I don't know if this game's going to do well with streamers, but
and that's what's crazy is that it was in the week or two that you could buy it. It was a big streaming thing. It was selling a lot. People were into it. And that's why I think that it's such a tragedy that the whole political situation exploded around it, because it really had the potential to actually get some of its message out to people who need to hear it. It's just much more common that you're either in an echo chamber or people just totally miss the point entirely.
Do we want to dig a little more into the story here, or do we want to leave it sort of this half a little more spoiler free?
I don't know, because that was actually a pretty good like summary of why it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with leaving it sort of spoiler free. Especially since the game's not like officially out right now. So most people will play it for the first time. You know, we've talked about the mechanics. We talked about the twists. You know, a lot of stuff, just like in Detention, is very abstract. You'll find an item that's, you know, seemingly, you know, not very useful. Like something like, this isn't spoilery, but it's an item you find like an origami flower. And you'll find a place to use the origami flower, and then what you unlock is not really memory-like, but it's more of like an abstract representation of like the relationship between the father and daughter. And, you know, there might be a memory involved, but it might be from the perspective of the daughter that you might not have seen before. Or they never show like the daughter or wife. They use sort of like, you know, visual proxies or like effigies for them. So you might see an abstract scene of like, you know, like a doll going through like a mechanical diorama that explains, you know, the daughter's state at that point in their lives.
Right. And I think that in this game, they took that same concept of abstract puzzle solving and abstract storytelling being rolled into one, and they just did it so much better. Mm-hmm. Like, I really loved the puzzle sections of this game. And
right.
This isn't a spoiler either, but there's one kind of long puzzle section in the middle of the game where it opens up and becomes kind of more freeform.
Yes. Great part of the game, by the way. It's probably the best part of the game.
Yeah, I thought it was so fucking cool. And once again, like we said earlier, they're still feeding you these little clues and ideas about the story. So you're thinking about the story, but you're also puzzle solving.
Yes. And you're jumping back and forth through time, but this is one of those points where you're actually like choosing what time period. It's still playing with the broken narrative timeline, but you're jumping back and forth like at your will.
And especially after playing Detention, thinking about that part, it's just such a streamlining of what they did in that game, and it's just such an evolution of what they did in that game. And I really haven't personally played anything like that that's done in such a smooth and well presented way.
Yeah, I have. And this is the comparison that I said I was going to keep making. We played Layers of Fear and it failed at this.
Yeah, it's so bad that it's just, I wouldn't even compare them. Yeah.
I can't help but compare them, though, because there's a huge parallel between Layers of Fear and this game that I cannot ignore. I feel like almost like this game is like a retort to Layers of Fear as to like, look, you guys had something and you blew it. This is what you really meant to do. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
It's got real emotional weight where Layers of Fear fell flat on its face. I always think about that quote you made in the Layers of Fear review.
The thing that bothers me the most is that my name isn't on the most beautiful piece of art. Will you marry me?
You know, Layers of Fear did the drawer pulling mechanic where you're searching stuff where there's nothing. Detention streamlines all that. The notes make more sense. You find items instead of just notes everywhere, but the items tell the story.
I wrote that down in my personal notes. I said you find notes and items, but you don't find any journal entries. Which, after playing fucking Glass Staircase, was so refreshing.
Yeah. The spooks, you know, there's one part that's sort of cheesy with the spooks, and there's one part in this game where you die. But most of the spooks are genuine.
Yeah.
Some of them turn it around on you. Like, there's a peephole you look through, and you feel like a creep for a second, you know?
Right. Yeah, and the scares in this game are really, really good. And the fact that they're not tied to death makes them also effective, because you're just like, oh, like that just scared me, you know? I
Yeah.
wasn't punished for it, you know?
Yeah, horror games are fun when there's like a sense of unease and danger. The jump scares aren't super fun, you know, at least for me.
I agree. I think if it's well done, it's one thing, but I just don't like the sort of punishment element where it's like, oh, like we're going to punish you for finding this thing, you know? Because a scare in a horror game is essentially something that you find. It's almost like an item or a collectible. And then to be like punished for it, it's just always struck me as really weird. A weird thing that horror games do sometimes.
Totally.
It's just a great fucking game.
I don't want to like tell people to pirate things, but you should pirate the shit out of it and send it to your friends.
Yeah, like if you don't know what fucking samizdat is, this thing right now is samizdat, which in Soviet Russia was basically the revolutionary act of illegally copying and distributing banned materials.
I love that. That's my new mantra.
Yeah, like what I mean, obviously like pirating games sucks in one regard because you want to support developers and you want to keep the ecosystem going, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like right now this game is banned. You're not able to buy it for political reasons. It's samizdat. Everybody should fucking pirate this game.
Yeah, if the Chinese government doesn't want you to play a video game, you should probably play it.
Everyone should be pirating this game and playing this game and talking about this game. And the games media should be talking about the political ramifications of this game being banned and the things that this game and Detention have to say.
Totally.
It's also just from an artistic perspective, it's a huge bummer because these games are such a good double feature. Like,
yeah,
it's really, once again, it's been a really long time since I've seen a developer put out two games that work together so well, where like they strengthened their craft and they made something that called back to their earlier work. And like these people are great artists. Red Candle Games are like great fucking artists. You know?
Whoever is in charge has a great vision.
The more that I researched this and thought about this topic and the more I played this game, I just got so frustrated with the discourse around it and just how just paper thin it is right now. And
sure,
I really hope that if people listen to this, the two things they do is fucking pirate Devotion and play it and openly talk about on the biggest platform they can how this is such hot bullshit. Several
years ago, people started having the conversation of like, you know, like what's next for video games? Can video games actually have like real purpose? You know, are video games art? Can video games make you cry? Remember that whole David Jaffe thing? If you want video games to like take the next step and actually like being thought of as like on the same tier as literary or something, you should support things like this, you know, especially if they're being censored.
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is fucking art, man. Like,
yeah.
This is real shit. This is like the actual culture war and not the like people telling you not to make the C word makes you mad because you hate your mom culture war. This is like, this is people actually trying to silence political dissidents, to erase ideas that exist. This is some fucking real shit.
Yeah. I can't think of anything less un-American than not pirating Devotion.